communication setting, conversions, process calculation, vortex, lower line, direct lines, ground calc, modified. Set communication lines, initial lines, and runs. High centers, line connections, all those. Execute platform, process lines and settings, and 0-1 travel. How we communicate to our system is coding. Now we understand that line coordinates, the E factors over line coordinates, lines of calculation, system interactions. But directly these things, for you to understand that line position to its proficiencies and its performance to its efficacies, you have to truly understand how to align the systems and all levels, how to commit your own coding systems of all calculate and modify your CPU. Processing your CPU line centers puts all communication system, how you come into your own conversions into the mind adaptations of set tractions. The Earth now is on its own sequence, on its own platform. You no longer know the tethered or attached to anything in set positions. All levels of the mind line brings everything in projections. Now you just have to identify, because you have way too much lines, core centers of expectations of everything in settings. Now you just have to come into the imagination itself, get into the projection screens, directing lines and positions, all levels, and all communications to its projector or projection. High setting lines of grounds. General is going to get position lines of travel. Let's get you guys to truly understand how to get into your own codification lines, imagination lines of core. That's where you are in position lines. The inner child is the core centers. The moderate line center locations of where you are in each category. Takes out screen adaptations of flux over settings. Now that process puts all modify. Remember we come in this positions, okay, through its primer. That's that lines of travel. In that communication system of travel communications. How to create lines of anomaly. How to recourse, retract, redivision, relocate the system. Okay. Credit lines, 4 settings of angles and 4 set calculations. Lines of flux, setting core centers, lines of travel. Directing lines of grounds, high signal locations, sending a circulation, rotation lines of surface and tractions. Adding frames to its equation, center upper line core centers and center calculation system. Surface grounds, 3 centers of platforms over screen adaptations of 4 centers in communication system attractions. Directing ground centers and high line sequence into all positions to solar graph communications into Skynet. Skynet. Okay? You're always, every time you flick the switch lines in the 4 center angles, you constantly see the grounds, powers, and the atmospheres. The process of communications is how you come into configuration lines of 1 signal, 1 travel, 1 direct locations, and 1 setting. Process indication system to your pyramids and set position lines of travel. There's a pyramid. Indicates ground centers of service, process in calculating modify, set lines of 3 centers and sequence locations. Directing ground centers, 1 signal line centers, process lines, 4 angles and traffic communications. Your pyramid's getting bigger. Your pyramid's getting bigger, bigger through expanding in set traffic communications. That's all it is in set positions. Crossing angles, 45 line angles, process indicates the system author travel. Sets ground centers of service location setting to its panel operations set locations into system to its simulation grounds. Process calculates the green centers, process illumination line set location to its systems, all through simulation lines of course. 3 centers lines of travel, platforms over set locations, into its galaxies lines of anomalies and set positions. Okay? So you have to truly understand how it comes in pixelation graphs and holographic line centers and rotation system at 45 communications. Okay, directing lines and sequence lines communications. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? Hold on in sequence. Yep. You need help? You good? Gracias. All right, so everywhere you go in line centers, you get distracted. It's a high force line center locations. You don't want to get disturbed in any way and form. So processing that line communication setting, you focus on one volume. One volume opens up all doors. It's not a secret. It's not magic. It's just practical. Practical, logical. Puts all communication lines of grounds and set lines of sequence. Now, communication lines of tether attached to setting line core centers and communication system. Now, the team and the units are now on their GPT platforms. The core centers line to GP, set calculations, green lines, adaptations of flux over screen, process lines, indication system, all through tether, all through tractions, all through locations. All right. 3 grounds of settings to 3 service location setting. Okay, to all levels. Perimeters over line, protection of our screens, flux over screen, flux over setting, flux over line, flux over equation. Okay. 3 grounds of 3 centers, process lines indicates the setting, and opposition lines online, offline communication with surface. Indicates the system, process lines indicates the setting of the attractions into solar screens adaptation system and its planetary alignment. Then you recourse to settings, process line positions. You put your planets in inline center rotation to its string theory. The process 1 volume and travel communications. Directing ground centers, here's your teleportation unit, and set course centers 1 next 1,000 communication. Very powerful stuff. Now, overriding lines, you get a center operation, outline signals. Now you can add 1 coloration lines of pattern, or you can add 3 lines of communication lines of pattern, but that's just 1 volume. You focus on that, don't focus on anything else. That cancels everything out. But everything's on standby, right? So you focus on that. When you focus on that, all this comes out in travel of direct signal locations of 45 flux. Process indicates the system, travels its communication system all through travel out of communications. Okay, expanding. Okay. And center op and communication lines of 4 angles and travel communications in direction. Directing ground centers calculation system, override the sequence. Okay, sets communications inside travel communications and settings. The operation line course centers cancels and deletes the position of its defaults. Set line course centers into execute platforms. You're going to see general talk more through a computer line centers and process communication system all through settings. Clocking lines of 0s, 0 1s of travel, process lines of 0 over 3, 1 6 lines of 8, 8 lines of 2. Sets calculates the screen's adaptation system all through setting, all through imagination core, a retraction. Very powerful when you come in that positions into its simulation system and travel communications. Okay. The connection lines of solar line course centers, electrical line communication system all through set positions, operate the signals location to its galaxy of alignments, rotates the cycles, line screen adaptation cycle lines. Processing that line direct signals, it's come into this line communication setting. We already saw that in traction, right? So as you come into this, you create new lines of anomaly. Okay, you create new grounds. So that puts process line, position, location, have the Earth center locked its own system to its own constellation system, are retracking its course centers and reconfiguration. Setting grounds in a 45 line angle, 3 centers of 4 grounds, 4 centers of 3 grounds, and 9 communication setting and track. Now we're going to modify realign centers in rotation surface and rotation system in galaxy system lines of anomaly. Rotate the cycles, course centers lines, calculation system to its traffic runways and set directions in directions. Planetary lines, Pluto's coming to travel. Online signals, rotate line course centers, solar generation lines, screen lines into 1 process communications. Directing ground centers, high lines of sequence, sets lines, time measure, and scale, and track locations. Right there, boom, looking there. See? Body, looking there. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that wild how you look at things? How it's already created through its anomaly, where you don't have to structure everything. Everything's done by itself. If everything's done by itself, what are you looking at? You're seeing everything that's already created. So you don't have to do anything. It's all done by itself. You're identifying you looking here and seeing something beauty from outside locations, which is in the lines of looking into space. Okay? All right, saying direct line ground count and modified direct high center location system of the attractions, directing centers, XC1000 comes in platform. Set travel communications, right there in setting and sequence. Setting calculation lines of cloud lines, high center line positional levels is a tango phosphorite, directing ground communication system. Overcross line connection setting of cloud lines, inside out line rotation set lines. Communicate the ground calculation lines of Syria, Galaxy, Foxtrot, directing lines of Lima, line course centers, Echo, Charlie, line centers, Alpha, Delta, set course centers, in line communication system attractions. Directing ground centers, high calculation lines. Other cloud screens coming in low screen adaptation system, over, drive line course centers. This is Alpha Bravo, directing lines, Tango. Sets communication system and line calculation setting travel, directing ground centers, calculating modifying travel communications. Now you can see me changing. Right, see? Changing. It's illumination. The more I stay there, the more it aligns an interconnected system of just coming into all levels, not just the conscious awareness, but everything to its system. That gets, communication setting, run its own system, all through attractions. All right. Okay, so we cloud change the setting of travel. We're going to highlight the setting the sequence, change corresponds to timelines. This rotates the cycle line center inference into its imagination core. Recenter operation line settings and communications and settings. Process the indication line connecting system. Okay, so let's get into the grid central line centers. Here's a planetary line in set position locations in Jupiter. Jupiter is in its green line rotation, set lines of attractions. Okay, Jupiter in setting. Cross indicate lines into Pluto. Pluto line signals on line centered lines infinity in purple line rotations and travels in its crown of calculations. Directing grounds calculation system comes into solar line center. Sonic interference, setting line position location of cloak and dagger. Set lines in rotation surface attractions. Look how powerful that is. Now I'm going to sequence lines of panel, cross lines and nebula, and set course centers line communication system to hemisync. Sets course centers lines of travel, direct lines and line centers. Cross lines indicate line course centers, directing out, calculate and modify cloak and dagger, directing lines on line center, line connection setting, align position location of void. Sets position of 1 over sequence over calculation system, all through attractions, all through locations. All through done by equation, right? Now we're going to eliminate the line centers, eliminate graph course centers, process and positions. Okay, we're going to bring in the actual intelligence information. Pixelations coming in, highline screens, adaptations, ascending attractions, coming in line settings, process indicates and system over travel. Security measure lines of 3, 2 over lines over. Sets calculation lines, direct signal locations over. Repeat over, directing ground centers over. High course centers coming to travel over. Sets communication lines and grounds to surface. Sets calculation ground centers, line connect pixelation graphs over. Set communication lines of tango. Set position locations. All right. So we eliminate the graphs, then we come into the blue lines that indicates position of blue plasma lines, directing lines of E force. Rotate the cycles, reset line course centers, and configure the system, pixelation ground lines. Communicate the ground centers lines of service, time 9 set position, all level measure and scale. Process indicates the system, all through attractions. So you can see me come into more information, right? As I'm constantly moving forward, right? Expanding lines of settings, now let's put augment communication lines of orange. Orange indicates the system of time frame. Oscillates the pixelation grounds and communications high lines of settings, and that communicates lines of service. And that communication colossal line course centers. Oscillation wind pass, process lines of 1 over 6, 1 over 8, 12 line settings and travel communications. Directing ground centers in sequence. Sets calculation ground center, calculate modified. Let's get in position lines of green. Overline sequence. Matrix locks. Directing ground centers, pixelation graphs, holograph line centers, line sequence location system off to travel. Calculate and modify all frames, timeline, center line condition setting, earth tones, directing lines, pixelation graph, communication system, all through attractions. Booyah. Okay? So that's you in pixelation. Overlooking the skyline, inside location. From this level, you can't see it from here, can you? Until you bring it in. See? Until you bring it in. All right? This is ongoing in sequence location of sim. All right. So in that positions, let's bring in line centers. This out of line rotation, divots over davits. Get position of 24,000 line settings, information lines. One cell modificates the ground set, calculations, neutrons, protons, electron, neutrons, height set positions, all settings. Calculation neurons, direct lines of sequence, lines position 30,000 line sequence. In that communication system attractions. High centers lines of travel, directing communications to unlocking, online center, and rotation. Okay? Okay, and then bring it in, and they can see you in pixelation off their attractions. Wow, doesn't it? So you reach on those levels and you can change the grounds too in sequence. Look at that position locations. And in that position lines of settings. Look at this interactions. Now you see it in all formation lines of grounds. Okay, pretty amazing stuff when you see that positions. All calculate, modify. Okay, see you're flying. Face recognition. See, you're flying. Right, you're flying in set position, interactions, and that position locations. It's pretty amazing when you see these things in the set position location and settings. All through set calculations, and you're sitting and traveling. Sitting and traveling at the same time. Sitting and traveling through the galaxies. Okay. So the more you modify your line centers, line center location system, that's getting cloak and dagger, outline centers and rotations. Track communications, change lines and settings in configuration system. All through set operation. Okay? traveling out, traveling in on a different angle. Okay, traveling out, traveling in on a different angle. So it's constant and continuous flow, guys. Internal force. External lines and screen adaptations of flying through a mechanism. Okay. Right, process indication goes around and round in set positions Fibonacci. Okay. That indicates 3 lines of grounds, 3 centers of measure, and 3 scale communications. Okay, going around the system in location settings. All through tractions, all through locations. Look at that calculation. All right, so center up, let's change the solar line screen. Go through the line, center locations to black, of course, centers of voids and rotation lines of surface attractions. Go through the line, course centers over cross line screen adaptation settings of track communications in line settings. And we come into the map in rotation with pixelation grounds of simulation. Okay? Then we come into this positions. Off the location. Right there. Okay? There it is. Boom. Okay? So I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how to identify these things by travel. And the more you go higher levels of the line, the more you understand how to identify everything around your system. Because basically, this helps you and always informs the C position. Look at that. Illumination. Oh yeah. Morphed into anything in travel. Okay? Look at this. And look at this. Okay? See how it illuminates, right? It's not coming from outside, it's coming from the inside. But it's amazing when you really start to see exactly what's going on in your simulation. Okay. It illuminates. Illuminates. Okay? Isn't that incredible when you see it in all ways and forms, all through travel, all through map, all through sequence, all through pi? Okay? All through your simulation. Okay? It's incredible when you see it, right? And you ask yourself, what is going on in set position of its travel? Okay. All right, so things are going to get more real lines. Core lines of projections over screen. The adaptation lines of force puts all communication system in tractions. Now, directing lines. Remember I told you about looking into space, 4 lines of settings, 3 travels, directing lines, and tether. Set course centers and line rotations to 3 ground centers to 6 over screen. Adaptation lines at 1 center. Oh, you can't see it, can you? I have to bring it in. It's gone, but it's still there. I have to bring it in. See how it travels itself. It rotates itself, so you can't see it, right? You have to bring it in. Okay, outline, inline. Okay, change frames, ground lines, time frame. Can't see it until you bring it in, right? Setting ground centers, lines of sequence, panels, 4 centers, set lines, high center location setting, and position location of pyramid. Okay, process lines, directing ground centers to calculations. Hey, it's moving by itself, look at that. All right, rotate the spin cycles, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 locations. Online settings, high sequence, outlining screen adaptations of flux. Whoa. Okay, structure line. Let's get into high centers and line and center line conditions set in A tracks, directing lines over B equals lines of C and set positions. Okay, correlate to track centers, tether over lines, parameters over line, rotation 3 centers of travel. Rotate this system in calculations, all through setting, all through sequence. Okay, high centers, rotation lines, set location system, and travel. Travel course, centers of communication. All right, 3 center lines anomaly, 4 centers line, communication lines of travel. Pyramid activation 1, travel point lines of 2. Exceed 1,000 platform, process line indication system. 24,000 line scale into 24,000 scale communications. Set correlations and time sequence. Set travel endpoint lines graph and platforms over E factors over default. 3 centers of travel communications. Directing ground centers in simulation graphs, a set position location with measure and scale. Mapping sequence through pi of highways and road graphs and screen adaptations. in position locations. Higher levels of channels, process indicates lines, sonar, echo, frame, line rotations, echo Zulu. Setting communicates high centers, change communications time scale and communications. Out center, line setting, line sequence. Location of travels, endpoint communications. Direct and ground centers and sequence line centers. Internal and external force, and 4 lines anomaly and set position of travel. Direct and ground centers and location system and travel communications and setting and communication. Road graph screens, 4 centers of sequence, 4 measure, 4 scale and communications. Direct and ground centers, high lines of panels, and process that indicates the system of their travel. Schumann resonance, high line course, and location setting alpha. Alpha data, process lines, omega zeta, line rotation, line condition setting, and structure design line set positions. Process indicates the system, and set line communication setting, pixelation lines into a mapping system. Ground centered surface, X marks the spot. Now record the position lines of center operation line sequence, panels, process system, in center operation setting. Indicate centers, change communication line timelines, frame communication lines as direct signals, location is 0. Process indication lines of box frame into set traction communications. See the volume and the box line. Ground centers of service, process overline screen adaptations of clouds and direct lines of communications. Overline sequence, panel operation lines, and direct lines of ground communications. Okay, see that? See that? Okay, communication. See? Laser track line centers. Okay, offline center, inside rotation service, in mapping line centers and rotation lines of pi, travel communications. Inside line conditions. Okay. All right. Okay, let's set up another panel. Remember, everything's a connection system all through simulation lines of grounds, holographic reline centers, lines of travel that puts all communication system all through service. So we're going to go through 12 lines of flux. Set lines of sequence over triangulation, 4 centers over cross line conditions in 1 cycle. Can't see it, right? Oh, look at that. Okay. All right. Change angles of point graph communication system. Can't see it, can you? Until you see it. So watch it come in through portal. See? Right, and then it's in system. All right. Lights on, high centers, line connection setted, high travels, in communication lines, alpha tango, process lines, vortex, XT1, process line, XT form, tango fox, lima fox, alpha, relines, center line car center 0-1 tractions, in set position. Rotate the cycles and travel. Okay. Offline centers, human resonance, come to high signal location setting to energetic domes inside travel. Energetic lines of waves, how they surface locations all at once in travel communications. Directing signals, flux over line, 4 lines of setting and travel communications. All right, okay, line centers of time, XD1 line centers, mothership and force line communication. Directing ground centers of sequence, location of travel. All at once in signal. All at once in signal. Okay, circulation lines, 1 line rotation lines, solar screens, adaptation lines of positions all over Jupiter, Mercury, and Saturn, and rotation lines of 3 centers of travel. Sets calculation high centers of communications. Oh, look what happened, disappeared. The planet, where'd the planet go? Off center, off rotation surface, and Pluto communication setting and traction. Sets calculation ground centers, high line sequence location setting, wave line screens, flux over line, rotation line, sight lines, high center for set position location of travel communications, directing ground centers to server location system. All through setting, all through operation. Okay, cloud screens, 3 centers of travel, direct lines of 4 lines, set lines of travel, cross line, laser line communication lines of travel, direct lines of solar ground communication lines into position location of solar ground screen adaptations. And settings, operation lines of sequence. Run system, line condition setting. Okay, center up. Electrical line, mapping lines of pi, generate the screen lines and rotation lines, appear in activation line rotations. Travel point lines of graphs, set calculations. Inside, outside, doesn't matter. It rotates itself. Okay, so we have center up, constellation wind pattern, that process indicates the setting time frame. Oh, look at that, disappeared. Bring it in, there it is. All right. Bring it in. There it is. Oh, yep. Oh, yep. Spin line, core centers of travel. All right. Then we change the frame centers. The process indicates the system of the travel communications. Working with inside the pyramid activation lines. Ground centers lines of 1, 2, 4, 6, and 8 platforms are setting of 0, 1. Ground centers of server locates system all through tractions. Right? Measure and scale. Modificate system all through travel communications 45 line centers. Information lines and ground communication lines and hieroglyphics. Crossing angles, fencing, rotation centers, and calculates the screen lines adaptation system and simulation. Wall sequence, process lines of platforms, open door line screens, and 4 centers of travel. Indicate 4 centers, offline centers of travel, 4 lines of flux over screen. Directing ground centers, online sequence, in location system, and travel communication to its location grid and set calculations. All right, so we go through laser tractions, directing lines over cross line, outside line condition setting. Process indicates the inside rotation line condition sets and the location of setting. Indicates lines, 4 lines screens, 4 lines flux, set communication system on angles and travel communications. All right, now we indicate the ground centers of service to operate the signal location to its positions, outline centers, end line rotation surface and travel. Puts all communication system and calculations. Now you're in directions, in line settings. Let's put you in line communication set travels, center point graphs, center operates line sequence, and center communication system as surface. 3 centers of grounds, and then we come to high centers of green. Green calculates modify outline signal in location setting as surface and tractions. Directing ground set calculation lines, platforms over line screens, inside line connection system off the platform. And track communication. Okay, change time frame. Long signals, elongated screen adaptations and attractions. Okay, so we indicate line centers in location grounds. Sets lines of sequence on 45 angles of rotation, surface, and travel. Okay. Platforms over E factors over screen adaptations of flux over screen. Sets communicates the system all traction at all angles. Limit the high centers in rotations as road graph and screen adaptation. Okay, so it's understanding inside outline center location system of the calculations. Okay, so I'm just basically showing you how you create this through anomaly and set travel. Okay, like you do this in triangulations, all through sending, all through operation. Adding color screens, guys, it's a lot more fun now because you can put timeline centers and constellation lines, eliminate the graph communication system and set calculation setting to consolidation and location system as surface and travel, but it still travels in set position, right? So once you stand center up, you can stay with green line centers and rotation through a cycle, or you can overcross location screens into secure line communication line settings in line condition system and tractions. Moves by itself in rotation, right? Pyramid activation lines at ground centers line platforms, process line E factors, ear line centers in the signal location system and travel communications. And then we change the ground centers of surface and 45 line angles in simulation and pixelation road graphs and holographic streaming traction. Okay, we're going to change the angles, formation line grids and set traction. All right, so that puts all communication centers. We timeline centers as sequence. We overcross the screen adaptation setting to 1x2000 and platitude and 1 center on operations at tractions. Location grounds, high signals, and location to its cloud that operates a system in pixelation grounds into its factory and position location to its setting and traction. Okay, so that's calculation of ground centers, set positions, all through sequence. Okay. So understand black and white and snowy graph interference, guys. Now, when you bring in color, well, it changes every location your settings of travel. In that direction, same location. Line cross lines indicates 4 centers of 3 centers of travel and direct lines of grounds. I say location setting, change the panels and screen adaptation system, all through setting through its operation sequence and calculation. Right. Inside lines, 2 centers of travels, 3 ground centers of service set positions. Okay. So it's amazing when you understand how to do everything inside line condition system off the calculations. Okay, road graph screens, constellation lines into configuration settings. All right, then we go into height positions of purple. Outline centers and sequence location. Galaxies lines of anomaly, rotate the line centers in hemi-sync. Set travel communication. Sets ground centers of service, rotates the cycles, screen center line, position one center, one operation, one sequence, one panel, one operation, line conditions. Booyah! Direction of ground centers. Okay, rotate the service in rotation lines, position of 4 centers of travel. Sets lines and communicates setting and configuration of light codes, directing ground centers set positions, operation line sequence, setting travels and communicates the system into cognito in direction. Process indication lines, solar graph screens, 4 centers of measure. Sets calculations ground centers surface and location system, the mapping sequence through pi. Okay, so it's amazing when you come in that position to its drawing through set position. All through tractions. Okay, so it gets more fun when you come into coloration. All through simulation. Okay, very powerful stuff. Inside positions, how you see everything inside and outside its position. Okay, all right, so now we got graph lines. We're going to get more in coloration lines into formula line course centers of E factors. This process lines and sending lines of communication system. All through your tethers. Attachment centers, no attachment line centers of 3 centers, but we get a process of indication lines of 1 travel. Okay, cross line triangulation on 1 line communication lines of travel. Process in equal lines of course centers of 3 triangulation line communication lines of travel. Travels on its own location. All right. Now, when it travels on its own, you go back to 0 line, set lines of sequence, process line to 24, 0 line settings, process line to 0, calculation screen adaptation of flux. Indicates ground center line condition of travel. So flux over 3, 6, 8 lines and 9, 9 line centers, 9 line position location measure, scales communication lines, tether lines, course centers, line condition, ground center location setting of scene and operation sequence and travel communications. Okay, road graph interference. Then we change the ground centers, process and position location to a cycle, travel point lines of graph. Okay, so we come into lines course centers, bolding screens of 2 travels in position. Process indicates lines of 3, 4, 6, 8, and 12 set tractions. Sets road graph screens adaptations of flux. Sets calculation lines, ground centers, and the opposite set location of direction. Process indication lines. We have open window panels. Process line indicates in system all through traction. Okay, cars and time frames. There's the cars and rotation. Each line has its indication setting and travel. Okay, and 4 lines calculations and travel communications. Okay, all directions, right? Open sequence and wormhole communication. Sending line ground centers and center course centers and structured visual locations, road graph screen adaptations of flux over setting. Process indication lines, high centers. Wall sequence of panel, indication system calculations. Right, illuminate the graphs, rotate the cycles, location setting and calculation. All right, so we change high signals, process lines of 1, process lines of 2, course centers 45 lines, 3 angles and travel, point lines of setting and communication. Platforms over 1 over 3. Now that indicates grounds and settings. Process the 3 platforms. Okay, we change the high centers into its primer, truth and false narrows, and 4 settings and sequence lines of panels. Process indication setting all through satellites, modems, satellites, and towers of communication. Setting travel point lines of graph indicates 4 centers, 3 communications into sonar, echo chambers, and screen adaptation. In travel communication, all through set position. Operational platforms is set position with operation cycle. Sets ground set line calculation setting over cross line condition system, over 2 lines of 0, 3 lines of 6, 8 lines of 9, and set travel communications. Directing ground centers high line sequence in simulation core and set position. Okay, inside outside line rotations in travel. Okay? So it gets very complicated when you go higher communication of the mind, how to get into string theories, locations, brain convergence, how it puts time frame, location, system, all the calculations. All right? Very complicated, isn't it? But it's a lot of fun when you understand what's going on with your system and structure. And design of travel. If it's not traveling, it's going to tell you. Okay, I know it's a lot taken in positions. So we had 2 more tethers, 3 centers of travel, 3 ground center line condition setting, high sequence line communication system and calculation. All through setting operation, right? This is all through schematics in a simulator that's set up in your clocking centers. Okay? High sequence lines of panel, process line indicates the setting of floor mats. Now it indicates lines, set lines as light shades and shadows and travel to a dimensional door screen. Sets operation sequence and platforms over a factor. Set calculation screen, dilatation, subtraction. Okay, and we come in high centers. Sets lines of sequence. Sets windows in 2 panels and 3 centers that communication lines and set lines of fencing. Process indicates lines over cross line angles. Another fencing line condition setting and process calculation screens. Sets communication high center travel. Offline center, inside rotation surface and travel communications. Directing online centers, portal communication lines of setting, process lines of 3/6 over screen, center operation lines of kaleidoscope. Now we had a kilo line, flux over 1, echo line connected to Zulu, Fox, and X-ray position. Setting travels in point lines of graph, set communication system, all through travel. Okay. All right, solar graph screen adaptations 1 over cross, 3 centers of measure. Then we bring in the planetary alignments and travel communications and setting up platforms. Process indication setting, process lines of 1 over lines, Pluto over cross lines of Pluto, process lines of setting of Pluto back and setting lines of sequence. 3 centers lines of measure, scales, communication, high centers. Cloak and dagger, invisible line chart of ways, 1 center, 3 point lines of graph, 3 atoms, and 3 molecular line structures of design lines setting a square root. Process indicates sit inside line condition system and travel communications. Setting course of reach tracks, directing lines of graph, communication lines and setting. Sets communication lines of ground centers of 1, process of 2, 6, 8, 12, and 14 lines of measure and scale. Sets communication lines of grounds over cross line condition setting and merging screens adaptation to its stargates and portals of communication. And then we go through factors over 1, indicates time centers of flux. Then we go through 3 screen lines, 4 centers line condition setting, 4 communication setting and travel point lines of graph, and line center line communications and highways and travel. Sets communication high centers and structural designs of its building to travel communications. There's the building. Okay, so let's eliminate the building line, rotation lines, outline signals. Inside, outside, outside, inside, and 4 lines of flux over setting. Process indicates in system, all through tractions. 1 center, 1 measure, 1 scale. Crossing all angles at position lines of point structure division. Change course of time and set communication existing and happening all at once in frame. Now we're going to go through 3 slide line lines, line course centers and platitude and rotation lines of surface contracted film strip design line. Process indication setting structure, rotate the system. Travels point lines of graph communications. Existing on platforms. Then we're going to go through the windows, process lines of 1. Now we indicate centers over 2. Process lines of 3 indicates lines of 4 in travel communications. Open windows and frame. Open windows and frame and travel. That's structured design line. Then we go with the blue sequence. Process indicates lines of center, operation lines of sequence. Set course centers of 0, 1, 0, 3, 0, 6, 0, 9. Back in 0, negative lines of 0, positive lines of 0. Set sequence lines of panel, constellation lines, consolidation, line course center, pixelation 1 cycle, TV reception line course centers, story graph interference, outline centers, default, E equals line screen adaptation setting, and travel. Size communicates high signal, location system, all through structure, all design lines of platforms and set position. Okay? All through setting, all through operation. Okay? So you focus on one volume that opens up everything. All around you in the 4 lines of flux, guys. And it travels on its own set position all at once. See? Rotating its system. Watch. Everything's rotating all at once. The circular rotation is constantly in that position to its system, all through yin and yang, a constant continuous flow, internal to external force in the same locations, just different locations, settings, all through track location, existing, and everything happening at once, and all the set position locations of travel, and direct lines of all communication system, all through set position. All right. So you have to understand how this all works now in structure line, right? You have set position line, the calculation setting. Now, does it rotate? Yes, it is. It's moving in set positions, right? Now, once you go back, you have to collapse the timeline. Looking at what you want to do, change the frame, change the traction, change the communication system, change the frames. Let's change the frames and lines of adaptation. Travel setting, rotation surface. Period activation lines the same color, rotates the cycles and pixelation graphs, core centers of 320 line centers, default over setting, line operation lines of setting, particle acceleration lines of time sequence times calculation. Directing ground centers high lines of sequence, process lines that indicate system all through travel. All through same color and rotation surface and travel communications. Travel's position, look point lines of graph, indicates system all through settings, in simulation and rotation setting attractions. Working within the simulation of its road graph screens, set position, location, and settings. All right, let's calculate, modify, operation sequence and panel, and rotation surface and travel. Okay, let's bring it in and set 2 platforms as travel communications. Oh my gosh, looks like your Earth. All right, so that's set green centers, high centers, rotation lines sequence, sets lines, pixelation graphs, indicates setting and communication, indicates centers of travel communications and setting. Process lines of indicates centers, process calculates lines and high positions. Let's pixelate the ground centers, okay, into core centers. Outline centers and rotation surface and 3 travels. And rotation system, which is Earth calculation. Booyah. Okay, now we're going to go through the simulation lines into your Earth in pixelation 1 cycles and 1 travel. Okay? All right, so we set lines of settings, process indicates the system. Let's say the outline. There's your Earth. All right? All communication high grounds. All right, low grounds, mediation line settings. All through pixelation line, core centers. Okay? Okay, so we outline this signal. We cloak and dagger line, defense lines that rotates the cycles and tractions. Let's go in that positions. Around the system location setting. Okay, let's do that again. I'm not allowed to see because the frequencies are way too high. There we go. Now we set up graph lines, 3 centers of grounds, 6 lines of scale. Okay, and then we come into 6 lines of centers, rotation lines of 7 lines, 8 lines of scale. Now we indicate inside rotations and travel communications. Face recognition. Face recognition. Okay? There's always a center op of a face recognition settings that process everything that it's drawing and set position or settings to your inner child. Okay, so we change timeline centers. There it is again, face recognition. See? Now it's coming into form. Now it's coming into face. Now it's coming into its hair. Now it's coming into its body. Now it's mutating its grounds to application of its Earth and rotation cycles and generation screen adaptations of flux. Setting communicates inside all rotation line conditions in the information system, all through setting, all through tractions, all locations, the inner child. Okay. All right. Now that's set up. Now we change the formation lines of grounds in a crop circle location setting of travel. Sets calculates the ground centers of sequence. We balance communication lines in red. Now red sets lines at 2 lines of settings. We don't want to overcross the screens because it processes communication lines of settings to all of your truth narratives, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 location, 1 calculation lines of pi. Okay, change it in location setting is square root. Process indication setting is structured division line, rotation system, and tractions. Okay, change time scale, change calculation setting, pixelation lines. The more you connect to your Earth line, you understand how to create it through hologram. That sets all communication system and tractions. Okay, so we go through deviation lines of 1, platforms over 2, solar system line setting. Process inline centers, nebula screen adaptation and attractions. Crossing angles, 1 flux over 3 centers of travel, directing lines delta, come into alpha. Data process 3 centers of travel communication indications. Inside lines, instruct division location setting solar panel. Process indication lines, crossing line angles, and location system interactions. All right, so we go through the central line into a black hole and set position. Center operation line sequence comes in all position location of green and center operation screen adaptations. Center operation line settings and location system puts all communication setting to orange. Now orange lines of settings, operation lines of sequence, sets communication lines of setting all through line core centers of travel. Tracking inside location system through the I division location system, all through tractions. The I itself. All right, see the eye comes in, line centers, rotates the system's above signal, browsing adapters, and force centers lines of travel. Indirect signal location. Okay. All right, so we work with inside the core. It set lines of illumination lines. Sun up, rotation ops, correlations, calculation lines, blue surface, inline rotations, interactions. Okay. Eye center lines of the mirror. See the mirror? No, wow. Mirror resolution. Okay. All right, course centers, rotate the cycles and travel communications. Rotate the system location, sending calculation. Window line, pixelation graph lines, directing ground centers, calculate and modify. Set positions of 1 over 2 over 6 over 8. Set travels window frame in the set rotations. Travel indicates system in the eye line rotations and travels in correlations calculation. All right, your central eye of set position inside its earth. Okay, you see the eyebrow right there. This is your face. There's the eyebrow. Okay, so it's the eye itself, looking at the eye itself. The condition moderation line is a direct line to the panel that processes and indicates the system of the setting. So you start to see the eye in all locations to its tractions. See, the eye's looking this way. Okay, oh, look at that. The eye's looking this way. And the eye's looking this way. And the eye's looking this way, tractions. So, if you understand how the central line is communication system, then you understand how it opens all lines of all position location to its panel. Process indicates the system of the earth, and rotation lines and set line communications. Okay? Pretty amazing all through structured design line. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? And it travels. All at once. All in sync, all in balance, all through operation of 0, 1. That's just 0, 1, free energy. But I just want you to truly understand how you come into this positions, how you focus on one particular thing and comes into everything through volume. Okay? One particular thing and everything comes in position locations of volume. Okay, guys? That's how you get in positions, right? Because you can't focus on 80,000 things and not understanding what you're doing and set travel in that communication system of the calculation. But everything travels all at once. Right? If it's not traveling, you're not in balance with your system lines that calculates the system. Always find ways to get positions of its flux and its anomalies and subtractions. Everything has to travel. Because everything's set up already by itself through travel. Okay? You can see it through the simulation and sending lines of travel, indirect sending lines of grounds. Now you can change this. So you can change the platforms. Now I'm adding an equation, just creating new. Not thinking about what I'm doing. Just know what I'm doing, just creating itself. See, and it still travels. You know, I can just color this all in blue. You see the inner line corresponds to thermal, X-ray Zulu, Fox line inside and out line communication of plasma, and all communication system, all through tractions. Look at this. Oh yeah. Oh, look at that. It disappeared. Let's do it again. See? You're not consciously aware of that because you're adding emotion. So as you add emotion, you've got to go back in setting. Back to 0. Don't go past 0 or you're -1. All through travel, all through recognition and face recognition. Okay? Booyah. Okay? Change coordinates and the communication lines of travel. Change time frames and location line conditions of travel. So that's what the team has to come into. Start with one platform and change in all formations. All at once. All in sequence, all in panel, all through subpositions. Okay? All through traction, all through locations. So really get creative and change it. Change the equations, change the primers and set sequence. Right? Overcross lines of center operation lines, of course, centers data process lines, Merkaba test and tetrahedron. Then it travels. See? It travels. Okay, and set position. All right, so you're just changing everything already. It's identifying what you already created, but when you're adding frames, you're changing everything. You're processing everything, and you're growing your sequence. All communicates in setting of clocking and set tractions. It's very powerful when you understand what you're doing through all levels of indication, all through operation. Okay? All right, but I just really want you guys to focus on one particular thing that brings it in all levels of volume of communication and setting. One thing, and then bring it out. Everything else is on standby. So if you get a box square root, square line centers, box frame, and a triangulation, right? It's traveling, right? By itself. If it's not traveling by itself, you're not doing something right, which you're already doing already, which is already done through its equation, traveling by itself, see? It gets more complicated, but it's a lot more fun when you're understanding what you're doing through travel. So it gets more complicated. It gets more complicated. It gets more complicated, but it travels because it's already gone through its travel. If it doesn't go through its travel, it's not going through its system of location, setting, and calculation, is it? All through its planet. This is a planet. Planet setting is a 3 triangulation inside. It's all traveling all at once as positions, right? Then you add equation lines. You can add anything in planet. You can add your solar system inside travel in the planet itself. Okay? In the planet itself, guys. There's nothing you can't do in the mind imaginations. All through coordinates, all through communication setting. Once you get your planets in, everything comes in balance. Right? Everything comes in balance. Can you see it? It's barely there. You have to bring it in high frequency and screen adaptation to its planet setting positions. And then when you bring it in, then you see the mass of volume of its planet system. See? You see the other side all at once. So when you're looking at the moon, you're not just seeing the flat surface, you're seeing all 4 settings. And set position of this, and set position of that in tractions, all at once. Now you see a box frame. Okay? Now you see a triangulation frame. It's set traction. Okay? Change time course, centers, line communication lines of travel. Directing ground standards, calculation, setting, and mapping sequence lines of travel. Triangular line course centers, line course center, communication lines of travel. Change time frame, change correlations, time calculation lines, put a triangulation inside rotations to its system of the calculation. To its portal of communications. To its portal of communication. All right, to its portal of communication. See the mass and volume through the cube? Just through the cube, guys. Isn't that wild? Where's all the illumination coming from? From you inside. Even if it's a bright day out there, it's not projecting anything. It's you from inside, what you're doing with your imagination. And it comes in all settings, it's all set position, volume, and mass. Okay? But it's constantly moving by itself because it's already done everything through its equation. See, it's constantly moving itself now because it identifies what it's already done through travel in all set positions. Getting confirmation lines puts everything in balance, right? Into its box and its window frame. Okay? And set positions and locations. All through tractions, off locations. Okay? It's I itself. It's I itself. Everything is inside the I. Everything is inside positions, everything of the I itself, right? Everything structures its online center, I-line sequence by itself. Indicates all communications on different angles, at different flux, at different lines of anomaly. Eyes looking this way, right? See that? Eyes looking that way. Laser tracks centers and direct signals to 3 grounds of service location system looking in that direction locations. Okay, it's looking that way and it's looking this way. All at once in 3 travels, 6 over lines. Process indication setting over cross lines, directing 1, position of 2, 4 lines of direct center locations. Looking in all directions and set travel. Okay? All through setting, all through pi. Okay? So I'm just trying to get you guys how this all works when you work in the inline centers to the simulation system of the virtual reality to its galactic energy core to your simulation lines of imaginary system all through theta. All right, the eye itself is that position. Okay, that coordinates everything inside of communication, the travel. Okay, very powerful stuff in set attractions. Right, and that's you in the center of operation, change your information system all through mutation. There's the face. There's the face. Okay, that's you inside the eye. That's you inside the eye. See the face? Okay? Very powerful stuff, guys. When you get in that position, just location with settings, all through operation, all through operation, all through setting, all through calculation system. Okay, all through attractions, all through locations. So constantly mutating and changing informations inside the eye line setting. Okay, see the coloration? See the coloration change your eye? Okay, yeah, wow, doesn't it? Let's add a little bit of light and reflection. And subtractions. Okay? So Colossus calculates line that accelerates line screen adaptation setting. That's clouds inside the eye line. The light itself, the reflection is the clouds itself in set attractions. Okay? It's the clouds, guys. Monitoring line centers, pixelation, line course centers, your floaters are the X2000s. The common platform of communication lines of travel inside the eye line. Okay? So, very powerful stuff in set position of the calculations. All through attractions, all through locations and settings. It's operation. Okay? That's you standing and seeing over the window. See, that's you standing right there, looking right there in that open panel. That's you in mutation, looking right there in that open window. Oh, what do we got here? Looks like a lion. See the lion come in? Everything you do is imagination. And everything you bring in is everything through its equation. So you're constantly adding things through its imagination. You don't need to defy who you are. You just understand how you got in position through all levels already. Right? Intelligence there. See? Right there. There's intelligence. Look. There's intelligence. Right there in setting. Okay? There's intelligence. Right there. All right? So you see it in all different angles. All different angles, guys. All different angles of travel. Okay? And face recognition. Face recognition. Okay? Very, very powerful stuff. Okay? And it all takes place inside the eye is set attraction. Inside the eye of everything. The process of position location of its Earth rotates the cycles outside line setting. In that calculation system, all lines are inside rotation setting attractions. Directing the eye line centers, change all information system and travel communications. Everything happens inside the eye. Now, the more you understand that, the more it gets easier through time. Okay? Change settings, process communication lines of one. Okay? Look at your eye. Okay? You can change the browse adapters to red and set position. Okay? But again, you're working with the eye itself and set attractions. All through setting, all through operation. You change the red inside communication. Because remember, you're all dimensions of yourself in travel communications. Because everything happens inside the eye and set attractions. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? Hoo-ah. So now you understand what a crop circle is. All through platform, all through schematics, all through screen. Okay? All right, I think we'll stop there in tractions, but I'm just showing exactly how you guys have to come in your own settings, your location system is just come into one volume. That masks everything. Focus on one particular thing, and everything will come to you through attractions. Much easier for you to identify how to see it in two panels of one setting screen. And set traffic communications. All right? See you guys in 5. Adios.